Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to episode 53 of Cutoffs and Coffee. We are your hosts, James and CT from T3 Performance, as always. And today on the podcast, we have Cam Hatch, a.k.a. Train Like a Savage. He is a savage throwing and pitching coach. Cam is out of Tempe, Arizona, where he runs his own facility. He gets athletes from 2 to 4 weeks at a time. And his big focus is not only throwing gas, turning guys from 80 miles per hour to 88 miles an hour, 78 miles an hour to 88 miles an hour, which he dives into a little bit as we get into the podcast. But one thing he talks about a lot that James and I really liked about this conversation is that he helps pitchers rehab throwing injuries, and he simplifies and trains them for their throw. We often see athletes try to come back from injuries and have not only the mental issue of coming back, but the physical issue. And so we dive into it with Cam of how he thinks is the best way to rehab overhead athletes, here specifically pitchers, to be able to get the most out of their throwing, pain and injury free.
And this episode is brought to you by Live at Bats, now at T3 Performance. We're going to be doing Live at Bats on Saturdays from now all the way up until the next high school season. So if you want more information on how to get in the cage, right, face some live pitching, if you're not playing fall ball, this is the perfect opportunity to keep sharpening your sword. All right, so Live at Bats now at T3 Performance. Reach out in our DMs for more information on that.
If you like what we're doing here on the podcast, Cutoffs and Coffee, subscribe to us on YouTube, like the video. That helps us out a lot. Leave comments. Let us know what you're thinking about it. Follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Reach out to us and let us know who you'd like us to talk to, what high performers you want to hear James and I take a deep dive with. So please do that for us. That helps us out a lot. That'll support the podcast. And without going any further and talking about it anymore, here he is, Train Like a Savage, Cam Hatch, episode 53. Enjoy. Coach Cam Hatch, welcome to the show, man. Cutoffs and Coffee, in your cutoff, in your fedora, beard gang. We got it all, man. What's going on? How are you today?
How we doing, guys? Glad to be here. Glad to be here. Can't wait.
We're excited to dive into it. I was kind of scrolling through, your Instagram and some other guys who I follow closely, and I thought was interesting. Some things like, now we're in a place in social media where everybody wants their name to be known, right? James actually very recently changed his name to James, right? So it's like, okay, we know who this guy is, right?
Right.
You are not Cam on social media. You are Trained Like a Savage. So everybody listening, understand what where this conversation is going to go. Is this guy goes by Trained Like a Savage, okay? And so we're going to hear where he came up with that name, and kind of his story around all that. Before we dive into the story, though, Cam, tell us real quick something that we need to know as hosts, and also our listeners need to know about you that we can't find from a quick Google or Instagram search.
Oh man, a quick Google search. I mean, I guess I've been getting into tea lately. I know it's just Cutoffs and Coffee, but I've been kind of sipping on some tea lately to get to bed and that kind of stuff. I mean, that's pretty lame, but that's something that you can't find in a Google search, that's for sure.
Right. And that's why we ask it. Yeah, what kind of is it just like the chamomile bedtime teas that you're
I like jasmine and lavender. Jasmine and lavender puts me to sleep. I had that last night, slept like a baby, so I woke up crying every 5 seconds. So
but anybody who has a kid knows that's not the right metaphor. Yeah, that's funny.
Right. So yeah, I've just basically been getting into that. That's about as lame as you can get.
No, we dig it. When we have people on who aren't drinking coffee, we basically switch the name to our alias name, right? Our AKA, which is Sleeveless Shirts and Stimulants, right?
Okay.
So if you're ingesting caffeine at all, we can accept it. But this is the tea you're talking about, is that evening, nighttime wind down tea. I got to think about putting that into my evening routine. I like that.
I'm still sipping on the coffee up here with the pinky up, of course, though.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We got a lot of different stimulants going on. I got an energy drink. I got a coffee here. James is drinking pre-workout like a savage.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Out of the bottle.
Out of the tub.
Out of the tub.
Anytime you get one scoop left in the tub, you just fill it up with water. That's how you down it.
Oh, geez. Okay. I didn't know if you were took the pre-workout, put it in your mouth, and then had down the water. I didn't know if you were a guy like that.
That's a good method. That's a good
Yeah.
method. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the dry scoop.
Right.
Cam, let us know also, man, either the last skill you taught yourself or something you're currently working on.
So this is a skill I've been working on for a long, long time, but I'm trying to build my body to the point where I can throw 95 pretty consistently. I've been doing this for a long, long time. A lot of people don't know this, but I've never been the hardest thrower. I've always tried to work with the hardest throwers, understand what they're telling me and their information, and kind of work with my brain to be able to train for that. But I have to train myself to be able to do that too. And now I'm 30 years old and I have a kind of a broken elbow and I'm trying to get past that. And, if I can do that, I think that'd be something that's pretty cool and people would ultimately follow as far as my story goes. The other thing I've been kind of trying to work on too is, I want to do a backflip too. That's one of those things where, if you don't learn as a young kid, that information isn't necessarily stored in your brain. So kind of being able to hack that a little bit, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, dude, skill acquisition as you get older is so much tougher. And especially doing something outside of basically your niche, right? Your sport. Baseball, you don't see a ton of I guess Ozzie Smith, you know what I mean?
Right.
Doing round off backflips as he goes out to, out to the infield. But besides that, I don't see a lot. It happens here a bit, right? We talk a lot about kind of like exploring training and being curious about your training. And we get some kids throwing some front flips and some back flips, but it's a super cool skill to have and a really good party trick, right? So once you hit it once, you just got to be prepared to be able to hit it at all times because people will ask. So from personal experience, just so you know, once you can hit it once, you're going to have to hit it all the time.
Well, once I get it, it's not going to be a problem trying to repeat the process.
Right.
Once you acquire a skill and you have all that, that's not going to be an issue.
Yeah. Ooh, I love that. So take us. We teased it a little bit in the beginning. Right? You talked about a little bit about it just a second ago, but tell us your story. What is the Cam Hatch story? What is the Train Like a Savage story? Let everybody know kind of where you started, when you fell in love with baseball and your baseball background, and then basically get us up to where you're at now.
Yeah. So that's a long-winded question, but I'll do my best. When I fell in love with baseball, it was when I was 9 years old. I played in Vernon Little League in Connecticut. That's where I was raised. And I don't know. I got selected to the majors. So our Little League was 9 years old through 12 years old. And I got selected to play in the majors with all the 12-year-olds and all that my very first year. And I think I was the only 9-year-old in town at that time. And we won the town championship. So that's kind of when I fell in love with the sport. I remember the town championship, all of us sprayed our hair orange because our team was orange. So we all sprayed our hair, and that was something that was really cool. I don't know. I just kind of fell in love with it, and I've been in love ever since. As far as the Train Like a Savage story, that actually comes from my old man. That comes from my pops. I was playing indie ball. I played indie ball for 4 or 5 years. The 5th year kind of got cut short due to elbow injury, but so in the off seasons, what I would do is I'd split it up. So half the year I would work and then half the year I would go play because as indie ballers, you don't make much money. So that's kind of how I would do things. And so what I did was I created a company in the St. Louis area at the time. And I didn't know what to name it. And so my dad was like, you should name it, Savage. And I was like, why? He's like, strength, agility, velocity for all ages. And that was kind of the acronym kind of going on in. And I was like, that's genius. I was thinking of all these names and, giving it time. And Pops came with this off the top of the dome, like first hit. And I was just like, okay, that fits. And then from there, I don't know, like I just thought that, Train Like a Savage would sound cool. It kind of rolls off the tongue. But for the first 3 or 4 years, no one caught on. Like I'm serious. Like I had below 1,000 followers for years, like years, probably like 3 or 4 years. And so, but that's kind of the story behind why it's called, Savage or Train Like a Savage. But ultimately, I started playing indie ball in 2016 after I left college. And then from there, I kind of went on a wild journey. So I've been to 45 states. Arizona is my favorite. That's what kind of why I stuck around here. I know you boys are from Ohio. I can't stand Ohio. Never liked Ohio, and I don't like Oklahoma. Oklahoma, I think we should just sell off to the national debt and just make the USA a donut hole right there. Like I just think we should get rid of it completely. But anyway, that's for another time. So yeah, it's been to 45 states, and I've played out in California in 2018, 2019. And then every single year I would kind of go back to the St. Louis area to basically make my money and be able to support myself. And in 2020 I got back, and obviously COVID hit, and I get back there and no one wants to train. Like no one. I have maybe 4 or 5 kids. So what I did is I started working at Jet's Pizza. I started working at Panera Bread Company, and I started running the business as well. And that's kind of how we made it for the first like 2-ish months or so. And then December hits, and I don't know what happened, but basically all the college kids kind of came on in. I got new high school kids, and we were kind of rolling from there. And so, all of a sudden now I had 25, 30 kids as opposed to just 5 or 6. And so I don't know if that relates to anybody, but I've always been of the sense that, if you just kind of keep taking care of what you need to keep taking care of and just kind of keep powering through, that eventually you're going to hit something, especially if you stick with it for long enough. So that's kind of the intro to my kind of story.
Yeah, man. As a baseball player and a coach, along that journey, kind of looking back at it, do you have any like profound moments in that journey that had a shifting in how either you approach your training or how you approach coaching the athletes that you get to work with?
Honestly, I would probably say it was New Year's Eve this year. I didn't, there was a buddy of mine that was asking me if I wanted to go out, and I was like, I don't know. I'm not feeling it. And that night I actually, went to the gym, and it's on my Instagram page if you want to see it, if you want to scroll back that far. But I worked out to like 2 a.m., 2:30, something like that, just to explore some movements. And I wanted to see kind of what was going on as far as, what can I bring into the new year that's going to, kind of bring a new energy or whatever. And that's where I started to explore the barbell a little bit. And that's where I kind of was like, well, I'm having this problem connecting the 9th to 11th rib and the hip, and I can't understand how I can get past this. And so I was like, well, the 90-90 position, we've been focusing on this forever, and I feel that 9th to 11th rib connection, and I feel the hip, I feel the positions, but I can't train through it, and I don't know and what's going on. So I ended up putting the barbell in a Zercher grip, and I was like, well, what if I twisted it and then tried to feel that come around? And what I ended up feeling is a very similar feeling to if I was to throw out of that position. So it was like, I shit you not, it was probably 1:32 2 a.m. and I was just out there playing around with the Zercher grip twist. And what I found out is that I could relax into that, and then I could also feel that kind of strong, firm brace point when I actually use the barbell to decelerate. So I don't know, that was kind of a shift in the way that I kind of ultimately thought about it. And that's where I started to integrate some more of the rotational training that you ultimately see on my page today.
So mom was wrong when she said no good things happen after 10 p.m.
She
I
was
got to send her
completely
that
wrong.
clip. Yeah. Maybe not after 10, but up until midnight to like 2:30.
If you're hanging out at the house, good things happen all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. All the time.
Cam, I think a lot of strength coaches we see almost get handcuffed being in a gym, right? Being in four walls and in a box, and training is only done in a facility that looks a certain way, right? And then athletes kind of think, oh, I can only train in this type of setting. As you're going through you probably don't do it much, but as we are going through your Instagram and scrolling all the way down, I can't even find one clip where you're in a place with four walls. I think having that lets you kind of explore, like you're saying, just explore movement a little bit more. Tell us about your setup that you have there. You're outside, there's a mound, there's a trampoline. I mean, there's a ton of cool stuff that, again, just even the first 9 videos that are up, you see you're outside the whole time. It obviously is a good benefit being out there in nice weather. But what is your gym setup there, and how has that let you kind of explore and become your own type of coach in that setting?
Right. I've never really thought about it like that. That's an interesting perspective. I've never heard of it like that, and never thought of that in my brain like that. But anyway, I got a trampoline out here. I got a big one. I got a mound. I have turf that goes about 70 feet. I have a net that you can throw on into. And then outside in the carport, I have 2 GHRs. I have a couple squat racks. I have some pirouettes. I have bands. I have a TRX. And honestly, that's really about it. That's about all I got. And so I don't know, as far as the exploration goes, it's just one of those things where, and for better or worse, the work kind of blends into personal life. Sometimes there's a lack of separation as far as when I'm working with the fellas. Obviously we have a certain time frame in which we train for the most part, but sometimes it's hard to get that separation. Like I'll be cooking, dinner or lunch or whatever, and I'll be getting asked a billion questions about, what do you think about this during the throw? What do you think about that? And so, in that sense, I'm always on as far as getting asked stuff, being fed information. And so that's really hard to get away. And so sometimes that's a good thing because it allows me to kind of keep going and digging on into stuff that maybe came up in my past as far as how I can help my athletes. But at the same time, sometimes it's exhausting because I'm just like, can you guys shut up? I'm just trying to chill over here.
Trying to air fry my broccoli, guys. Like, give me a second.
That's what I'm saying. Like, get out of my face. But no, it's sometimes that turns into a good thing where it's like, okay, let's go into the backyard and try to figure this out right now. Let's try to feel what you're ultimately trying to feel. Whereas in the past, if you're in a facility or what have you, you don't have that client relationship, right? Like that client can't just like follow you to your house and be like, hey man, I'm having a hard time feeling this today. It's like, no, you go home and you do your thing and whatever. But here there isn't that. And so for better or worse, sometimes that works my advantage and sometimes that absolutely drains my energy. But the point is that I'm basically always thinking about ways to kind of fix whatever's going on with the group that we have here.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to it in terms of like your elbow pain, and I'm sure a lot of guys kind of seek you out in terms of like their road to recovery to be able to throw again. During that process of working with athletes or for yourself, where did that fascination with helping athletes get out of arm pain start with you? And then what does that look like as you're getting clients that are, showing arm pain or coming off of a surgery kind of look like?
For sure. Yeah, no, the fascination is getting me to be able to throw pain free and for a consistent amount of time. If you look at my independent ball stats online, I mean, I've really and truly only had one healthy season in 2018, right? So, and even then, I had to get shot up with the cortisone shot to be able to, finish that season strong. And so the fascination comes from, well, I was doing everything physically right, and I still wasn't getting the results that I wanted. So where's the disconnect? Okay. And the disconnect was in basically how I throw, right? I was getting into position that, were hindering me, and I was getting out in front of my elbow like this, which people talk about elbow lead. And I took that to the nth degree. And I was like, all right, I need to lead with the elbow. And I started doing a lot of pivot pickoffs and that kind of stuff. And, that's not to say that pivot picks don't work for some people, but the point is that I was getting way too far out front. And I thought that I was doing everything right physically to be able to get to that point. And so that's where my fascination with kind of arm pain ultimately comes. Now, as far as addressing an athlete that comes to work with me, I think what the industry is kind of missing the boat on, and this is kind of a delicate balance, but I think the industry is missing that we have to stress the tissue to be able to build up the capacity to do a stressful movement. Throwing is stressful. And ultimately, I think where physical therapists and sometimes strength coaches too, is they're afraid to stress their athletes in the sense that let's get this thing ready to go fast, right? Like, how is it that I look at somebody's rehab throwing program being like, okay, we're going to go out to 90, 120 feet, but you're not allowed to do any pushing exercises. You're not allowed to do any chin-ups. You're not allowed to do X, Y, Z, whatever the case may be. That doesn't make any fundamental sense to me in my head, because I've been through elbow pain, and I can tell you that if I'm throwing 120 feet, that's pretty dang stressful on my elbow, right? But I'm not allowed to do these other exercises to prepare me to get to that level. That's just, it's blasphemy. I think, the industry is ultimately lying to you as far as that goes. So if an athlete does come to me, I want to make sure that we take care of, making sure that we are stressing the tissue and getting it ready. And then, one of the other things is that we have to check a lot of different areas. We have to check some cervical rotation. We have to check supination is a big one. That's a huge one, because if you're constantly pronating over the ball over and over and over again, how are we not checking supination as far as self-correcting? So that's where I kind of came up with the idea of the chin-up eccentric. And it's not like this is a new exercise that all of a sudden, I came up with. I'm just saying that I use it a lot in implementation, but you're getting elongation through the supination. So you're resetting that. And what you'll see a lot of guys do is that'll cave in like that. Okay. But we have to be able to elongate right through this tissue right here. Okay. And if you're not looking at this online on YouTube or whatever the case may be, I'm just looking through the extensors on the forearm. Okay. The extensors on the forearm, if we can elongate that and then line that elbow up underneath the wrist, you're going to feel that, and that's going to reset itself. And then, you get elongation through the lat, you get elongation through the bicep. There's just a lot of, and you also turn off the traps too, right? So you learn how to relax those. You learn how to engage the scaps too. And so again, there's a lot of aspects that you can't really miss. There's a lot of things that are engaged with that eccentric chin up. I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, and I kind of went everywhere, but that's ultimately what you would kind of get if a guy's injured and having trouble kind of coming back to throwing.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense too, just from like personal experience. Like as we get into off seasons with baseball players, I'll have to throw a little bit more or long toss, and just like always kind of self-checking, like understanding what's not comfortable. And sometimes just doing some chin ups are less comfortable for me personally after longer throwing sessions. And and then like trying to find like, okay, well, this is uncomfortable. Why is it uncomfortable, and what's happening? And then like maybe I need to spend more time doing this, as kind of that self check-in, and that being in tune with your own body, and then you're able to do that and deliver it to athletes. Now I know you work with athletes like in person and remotely. Do you find that it's easier to have those conversations about like getting athletes to understand, to tap into their own body when they're in person? And are there things that you can do remotely that kind of help guide that like brain to body connection with those remote athletes that you do work with?
Right. So remotely, you get like a small taste, basically. It's I mean, it's a good product. I'm not saying that it's not, but it's a small taste and a small glimpse into ultimately, what I do on a daily basis. The in-person people, you get my soul. Like I'm literally pouring into you because it's so important that those guys do well. Because you're first of all, you're living with me, you're paying a decent amount of money, and we're training pretty much every day except for Sunday. We have to take some time off, but I'm literally trying to navigate your entire process if I can, and I'm trying to take that on. So obviously we do the physical stuff. We're going to do throwing stuff too, which, it depends on the guy and what kind of shape they come into me with. So if you're a guy who's lacking physically, like we got some serious work to do, and ultimately that's probably going to be more important than the throwing side of things. And then there's other guys that come in that are, physically pretty prepared, but just need kind of a perspective shift on, how am I interpreting the throw? What am I doing wrong? And, what are some ways that the industry may be telling me, but isn't necessarily fundamentally right as far as how they perceive the throw. And then on top of that, it's also, you're getting some injury work too. Like if you need tissue work, I can help you with that as well. That's something I haven't really been advertising because I'm, going to school for massage therapy as well, on top of everything that I'm doing at the house too. But, that's something that you also have access to as well. So when you come here in person, whatever your goals are, I'm going to scratch, claw, and fight for each and every goal. And so if guys come to see me, a lot of guys come to see me for like 2 to 4 weeks, depending on what their schedule allots for. If you're coming for 2 weeks, that's a flash in the pan. If you're coming to me for a month, that's still kind of quick, but we'll see some changes, as far as, there's guys that come to me and they're like, in a month, I want to go from 88 to 93. And I'm like, okay, let's make that happen. But just realize that there's going to be a lot of frustration. There's going to be some doubt. There's going to be some days where you're going to absolutely hate me. But let's work through this and let's keep going. And ultimately, I mean, for the most part, most guys end up reaching that goal because, again, I will pour my heart and soul to make sure that that absolutely happens.
You said something earlier that I'd like to go back and talk a little further into it, because it's a situation that I find myself in pretty often. And it's basically the return to play, rehab, athletic training side of sports where, and you had mentioned it, and what I say often, and I got this from Jake Tura, who we had on a couple years ago, he says low stimulus, low adaptation, right? And I feel like that's something that we see a lot coming from the athletic training side. And I understand that there are a lot of very good ATs, but it seems like the 3 sets of 10, 2 sets of 5, and then
right,
you're good to go. That hasn't worked, I don't think, on anybody ever. But that seems to still be the prescription, at least coming from the athletes I'm working with. So that's something I'll say, well, low stimulus, low adaptation. So we have to do actually a little more, right? And like you said, you've got to stress the tissue to build up the capacity to do stressful things, right? You've got to stress the body, greater than the stressors that it receives on the field or
Right.
on the court or, insert your playing field. So when you get guys who come to you, and I'm sure you do because it happens everywhere, who come in and say, hey, I've got this issue. I can't do this. Hey, I got a hamstring. I can't do CT. I can't do any lower body today.
Right.
I'll say, okay, first of all, you can. Don't say you can't do any lower because we still got that whole other leg. We got the ankle. We got the foot. We've got everything else. How do you navigate those situations when you understand people are coming from a background of rehab where a doctor or an AT have told them, and then they come to you and you say, well, actually what needs to happen is you need to stress this tissue so you can do the stressful things. How do you kind of build into that? Where do you start? And then ultimately, what's the goal? Let's say it's getting back to throwing pain-free, right? How do we kind of work somebody through that entire process? Let's say we have a month with you, right?
Right.
What does that look like? And again, another one of those long-winded questions, but it's a situation I find myself in all the time. And I don't think athletes really connect or understand that quite yet, that you've really got to change a tendon or to change an injury. You've really got to stress yourself more than you've ever stressed yourself before to come back to where you're
Right.
at and ultimately where you want to go. What's that process kind of look like for you and your guys?
Right. So that's a fine balance. And I think it's kind of dual fold in the sense that, and how we attack it. So obviously, you can't start off with, no pun intended, the most savage thing possible. Okay. Like you can't start out with a guy doing the most extreme version of what you ultimately see on my page. When they first come in, especially if they've had like years of pain. And I always tell guys when they first come to see me is like, you've had 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of pain. I'm not going to take that away in, 3 weeks. That's going to be something that's going to be a process that we're going to have to ultimately work through. So where we start is, where ultimately are those guys kind of, depending on who they worked with, where are they lacking? What are they missing? Right. It could be, common ones are making sure, again, supination's key, making sure that they have built up elbow density. That's what they need, or performs like what they want. Making sure that they have cervical rotation, checking to make sure that their shoulder's in the right spot. Just basic stuff that you should ultimately know after working with enough athletes. And then from there, I think where the industry's kind of missing too is, where do we address that in the throw? And how does that all tie into the training? Right. And then from there, it's kind of a gradual building process of, okay, you've gotten past the first week, we're kind of in the clear, or you may be in a deficit where your tissue hasn't been stressed like that before, and you're maybe a little sore, maybe a little tight and tender. But by the second week or 2.5 weeks, we should start to get you kind of over that hill where you're starting to feel a little bit better, right? And ultimately, if you're not, what is it that we can kind of change and shift to get you to that point, right? I don't always have it spot on as far as what ultimately your body needs. I just have a general sense and a guideline as far as, based on my experience, I can tell you different things that you maybe never heard before. Right. So that's kind of how I can guide you through the process. And then the goal by the, 3.5, 4 week mark is you should at least be very, very close to those goals, if not exceed those goals that you ultimately set when you first came here. Now, that's not a guarantee. I never sit up here and guarantee that, that's what it's going to be by the end of your time with me. But there's I'd say 75, 80% of those guys that come in with that arm pain, with that chronic pain, ultimately hit those goals. And then from there, you should have a very good idea of, where do I need to work on in my throw? What do I need to do physically to keep feeling that way? And that's how you should keep progressing on. That's kind of how it works.
Are there staples that you have? Are there things that are your kind of go-to moves, or is everybody individualized based on some of those kind of checkpoints that you had just brought up?
Yeah, so obviously, as I touched on earlier, chin up eccentrics are huge for me. I don't know why I like them so much, but I do. It just helps with so many different aspects. Like I said, the tissue elongation through supination. It's going to help out elongate the lat. It's going to help out the bicep, which is one of the main decelerators as well. Now, again, you have to be advantageous on when to program that, because an eccentric load is obviously going to be slightly more stressful. So you have to build it out in the right timing. But that's one of the good ones. And then from there, it kind of just depends on what guy comes through and ultimately, like, what do they need? Sometimes guys need to be able to move their scap. Like, for instance, there was a kid from the Dominican Republic that came in this summer that his scap, like, literally didn't move. He had no serratus whatsoever. Like, it did not move. And so what we had to do was I was like, Poppy, like, we got to get this thing moving, and it hasn't moved in years. And we have about 3 weeks to do it. So we got to move it a lot. So, he was a guy that had some serious shoulder pain, and it was creeping on into his elbow. And so we just kept moving it. We kept pounding away. He got into the third week. He was at 3.5 weeks. He's like, man, like, I can't see it. It still hurts. Whatever. And he gets up in his last bullpen, and he set this extremely high goal for himself. And I'm sitting back there, and I'm super nervous because this dude had days where he was throwing 75 miles an hour for multiple sessions. And then on the last day here, he hits that 88 mark that he wanted to hit when he ultimately came here for the first time. And he started out at like 80, 82 miles an hour. And, there were times in which, like, he's like, I don't know, I can't see it. I want to quit right now. Like, I don't even know if I want to play baseball anymore. And he went from that to the last week where he came out and he was touching 88. And then he texted me about, 2 weeks later or whatever. And he's like, I did it again in a game. I hit 88 again. And, I don't feel really any pain, and it's starting to move. And so, those are the stories that I ultimately like, because how is that even possible? How is that even possible that a kid with chronic shoulder pain, with chronic elbow pain, comes through here and sets these astronomically high goals, and then all of a sudden, he gets them? And that's not every story. Not every guy comes through here and that happens for, but a good majority of them that ends up happening for, just because, like I said, if you come here, I'm pouring my heart and soul. Like, you're getting everything that I got. And again, there's no separation as far as the training, the living, that kind of stuff. So basically we're on all the time.
Now, as an athlete, former athlete in CT, you can kind of resonate with this, and obviously can with your playing experience. Like, it's not always advantageous to be on all the time, from a nervous system standpoint, and right. As we're working with our athletes, like, sometimes it is way easier for us to, like, hype kids up and get them riled up and get them pumped up for that PR. Are there things that you do with your athletes to kind of help yin and yang that? Because, being in those competitive environments, it's not always higher stimulus is going to get higher results, especially, if you're a starter and you got to go 6 innings, you're not going 6 innings based off of hype. Are there
right.
things that you incorporate to kind of help that yin and yang and that excitement and that calm down with how you interact with your guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a big believer in some meditation. So in our bullpen days, we kind of walk through as far as what they ultimately want that to look like, and being able to use your breath to kind of channel that energy. The other thing that I've been kind of playing around with too is the electronic stimulation too. I'll use that device as well to kind of get their nervous system to be able to send that information in a way that it can kind of ultimately interpret that and be able to use that and channel that. So we'll go through a protocol in which we'll use that, and it'll kind of wake up the central nervous system. And from there, you should have a pretty even keel sense of energy as far as your brain should be able to process information at a much, much more advanced rate. And from there, it should just be about kind of controlling your breath. Okay. And then the other thing that I do during the bullpen session is, well, in the meditation too, but I always have them set an intention for that bullpen. And there's always a plan A and there's a plan B. Okay. So the plan A for most guys, because, most high school athletes, most college guys, most pros that come through here, they ultimately want to throw hard. So most of the times that plan A is going to be, all right, I want to hit that PR number. Right. And so I have them set that intention during the meditation. And ultimately, when they're about to step on the mound, I tell them, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take a nice breath in and breath out. We're going to breathe up to one of those pretty palm trees that you see in Arizona, not in Ohio, of course, but in Arizona. And I have them set that intention right there. And I'm like, let's commit to our plan A right here, right now. And it's not a hyped up energy. It's like, we've already done it in meditation. You've already seen it in your brain. Now it's kind of go after it right here, right now. And if we need to make a quick pivot to that plan B, we can make that pivot through our breath. Right. So that's one of the ways in which I ultimately kind of shift their perspective and help them through that process.
Do you have anybody a bit resistant to things like that? I'll say, hey, we always say at the end of the episodes, continue to practice gratitude. We believe the mind is powerful.
Right.
Meditation has been huge for me, and I know for a ton of other athletes. Do you ever get any high level guys with a little resistance to that? Because I know to some people it sounds a little woo wooey, but it seems to be something that's coming along and become a bit more popular and a bit more accepted recently.
I have not. Ultimately, everybody that's basically come through here has been pretty open to basically almost everything, which is crazy to me because, if you look at some of the stuff, it's like, why would I ever do that? And again, ultimately part of my, I guess mission or whatever you want to call it is to kind of change people's perspective as far as, what is training for baseball kind of look like? What does mental training kind of look like for the baseball player? Right. Because in my journey, I noticed a lot of guys that, to ultimately help them perform, what they would do is they either use a bunch of stimulants, which I've been guilty of too, as far as, too much caffeine or, what have you, or energy drinks like you like.
Yeah, right. As I'm like
double fisting right there.
Yeah.
So I saw that, and then also, guys will get on nicotine too, where they'll be like, I need that kind of extra buzz to be able to get myself in the right mindset. And when you're playing, 100 plus games in a summer where it's in dead heat of summer too, to get to rely on that isn't necessarily a healthy thing and a sustainable model. Right. And so, we kind of have to shift our perspective as far as how are we going to get through a season healthy. Right. And, as far as guys that have come through here, for the most part, guys that are reaching out and want to come through here are looking for that shift ultimately. And so when guys come through here, they're looking for they've done everything else, right? When you come and train with me, you literally exhausted all your options. You've been through the strength training, you've been through the industry standard, you've been through the plyo balls, you've been through the long toss, you've been through the drills, all that stuff, right? And then you're like, well, this looks different. Like this is completely off the cuff. This looks like it's crazy, wacko, whatever you want to call it, right? But you're coming to me on your last legs and you're like, listen, I want to make this thing happen baseball wise. And I've done literally everything else. And so they almost come in, and excuse my French, they almost come in with a fuck it mentality where they're just like, forget everything that I've ever done kind of leading up to this point. I'm all in. Where do I sign? And so, I don't know if that's because I give off that kind of energy or something like that. But, most guys come through here are on their last legs, and they're kind of looking for, they're fighting for every inch. How am I going to climb back? How am I going to get back to 95? How am I going to repair a torn UCL? And I've been told by 3 doctors that I should shut it down. What do I do? That kind of thing. So as far to answer your question, kind of a long-winded answer, I haven't really gotten much resistance. Maybe that's something that's going to happen in the future as far as we start to gain traction or whatever, and there's more high-level guys that ultimately reach out looking for that next level. There may be some resistance in that way, but most guys that come through here, like I said, are kind of on their last legs. They want to do whatever it takes, and so they just kind of look to me to be like, okay, what does that process ultimately look like? Does any of that make sense, or am I talking crazy?
No, absolutely. And I, personally, I fell into that rut. I think it would have been my junior year in college when I was playing, and like I had to have a Red Bull and 3 Advils to play a game. And I was a position player, and I was playing outfield and infield, and it's like it didn't click as 20-year-old James that like that's not a good habit. That you shouldn't need to take 3 Advil and have a Red Bull before every game that you play, especially if you're, I'm not even a pitcher. So, it wasn't until a little bit older, maybe the following year, when I was playing, or when I actually broke my leg my senior year of baseball sliding into second base, and like I had to take painkillers to handle the surgery when they put the plate in. And after that, like Advil is not something that I'll ever really go back to as like getting into that habit. And maybe it took that like massive injury, which was not related to my throwing arm, which is why I took, the Advil, but like I had this pretty substantial injury. And then from that point on, like I didn't want to lean on anything because I wanted to be more in tune with my body. And if there was pain, I wanted to really find the root cause and dive into why that's happening. And maybe it takes something like that for athletes to realize, like you said, maybe it takes, this is the last opportunity, or this is my last chance to kind of reach those goals that I had set for myself, to shift my mindset. So I 100% resonate, with what you're explaining there, and have some personal experience through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think at some certain point, if you're playing that many games, you have had that experience, right? I had that experience too. It was like my elbow is in so much pain, and what am I going to do to be able to get through that? And and so you lean on substances, you lean on what at that time. And is that the best way to get through that? Probably not. But also there's a fine line between doing whatever it takes and being smart about it. And where is that line? That's always a dance, right? Because if you do whatever it takes for long enough and you're in pain, your body's probably going to give way sooner or later. If there's a difference between it being, game 7 of the World Series, or you're trying to make a playoff run versus, you're in the middle of a season and there's no way that you're going to have to take 5 painkillers a day and get through a season healthy. There's no shot. That's not a sustainable model. And so it's like, where is that dance? Where should I be most advantageous? and what ultimately is going to be best for my career kind of going forward. So if nothing else, I would really encourage athletes to be more cognizant of that and aware of that, and ultimately think about that should be a decision. It shouldn't just be like a off the cuff kind of thing where I think a lot of guys get in the habit of, it's just like, well, this is daily life. And it's like, no, that's not daily life. Drinking 2 Red Bulls and popping pills is not going to get you to the major leagues. I'm sorry. Like, we have to have a different plan. Now, if that makes you have to take a couple steps back to ultimately get 4 steps forward or whatever the case may be, I would do that rather than try to gut through it. Now, I also understand it from, because I've been in it, I also understand it from, a baseball standpoint. Baseball is brutal as far as player development goes, and also the fact that they have access to so many different players and pitchers, right? And so if you get injured, if you're in the training room, whatever the case may be, they'll just cut you unless they have a strong financial investment in you, 3rd rounder, 1st rounder, bonus baby, whatever, right? Unless they have that financial investment in you, they don't care. They'll just toss you to the side. And so ultimately, if you're a guy like that, where you're injured, you don't know if you're going to make it, it's a risk. But I would strongly recommend that maybe you, cut me. I'm going to just rehab and get myself right, get my mind right, get my body right, and then ultimately make that transition on into, okay, I'm going to prove you wrong, and I'm going to try to get signed by another team. Maybe that's something that you think about. Maybe that's a little bit perspective shift. But I get it, because I know how hard it is to get signed with that organization. So where's that kind of line where ultimately do I try to gut it out, or do I kind of take a step back? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think like one thing that I can kind of relate to that is what we see more commonly on social media is like guys ripping salt before they're doing like
For
a
sure.
max effort mound throw in maybe February or January of their off season, and like they're doing all of these things to go from 89 to 90,
Right.
where that really won't play, because let's say it's a high school kid and they're doing that shit, and like it's in January and they're trying to get amped up, hyped up to see 90 on a gun, but like the environment that they'll go into a showcase is not even close to the same environment that they're training in. And they
Right.
expect then, because they saw 90 one time on a gun, that they're going to go to this PBR event and then like have an amazing bullpen and hit 90 every pitch.
Right.
It's like, yes, I get it. You've worked really, really hard to get here. But doing these extra things isn't necessarily going to turn heads when you get to this showcase event or this opportunity to throw in front of college scouts.
Right.
And it kind of diminishes the long-term results. It's harder to kind of step back for an athlete to reflect on that. And the younger they are, the harder that like process is. And I think that's one of the things that I really try and instill in the athletes that I see. I work with predominantly high school and college baseball players, and just like helping them understand like the ups and downs of the off seasons and managing those kind of stressful environments, because just because your buddy hit 92 on a gun yesterday doesn't mean you need to go and have a max pull down day when it's not like a part of the plan.
Right. Right. And it's just a nature of the beast nowadays. But since social media is so prevalent, and since social media presents everybody's best version of themselves, especially coaches too. I mean, they're putting out there that this kid went from this velocity to this velocity in this short a time, right? And so kids' expectations are, well, it should happen super, super fast. Like it should just be like that, right? So yeah, you have to promote it on the business side of things, but ultimately it's kind of affecting the kids that you kind of want to work with, in the sense that now that they see that, now their expectation is, when I come see you, this is how fast it should be, right? And Does it happen for some guys like that? Absolutely. Like I think we can all attest to that, where, guys see these 6-7 mile an hour jumps within 2 weeks or something like that. Right. I've had that happen. Is it few and far between? You bet your ass it is, but it does happen. And when you present it on social media, again, these kids are consuming that and they're looking at that and they're being like, well, that should happen to me too. And so velocity is ultimately the name of the game. And so, you run into these situations where these kids come in and they are almost like anxiety ridden or just like supercharged. I don't know what energy it is, but they are just like this and they want to get going and they're just on. And it's like, to get to that point, to ultimately throw that hard and process that much information and be able to turn muscles on at the right time and fire them properly, we're actually going to have to take a breath. We're going to have to relax. And then we're going to have to learn how to turn that on super fast. Okay. It's not going to come from you being tense like this and all that. It's actually going to be able to learn how to relax. And most kids come to me not relaxed. Most kids come to me and they are stressed out because their entire world in their mind comes down to, can I hit a number on a gun? Because that's ultimately going to lead to my college scholarship. For better or worse, that's kind of how the process works. And it definitely affects a lot of the kids that I ultimately, end up working with.
Yeah, I think anybody who's spent any time in a weight room can also make the connection between, PRs, big lifts, and things like that.
Right.
Where I'm not sure I've ever PR'd on a day that I've come in jacked up to try to hit a PR.
Right.
Right. Most of the time, it's a Tuesday that I didn't sleep very well the night before, and I had other stresses going on in my life, and I was just getting a session in to get a session in. All of a sudden, you hit a PR front squat grip reverse lunge, and you realize that you didn't do all the things leading up to it, right? Like, I skipped my red light therapy this morning. There's no way I could ever hit anything heavy. You know what I mean? Like little things like that. And so there is some carryover, as you're saying, to being able to throw hard. When the only intent is to hit a certain number, it's much harder to reach that goal. But when the intent is output and training and enjoying the process, that seems to be kind of where the magic happens.
Right. But to get kids to fall in love with the process these days, I don't know, maybe I'm speaking like an old man. I'm 30 now or something, but
you're younger than us.
but to get kids to kind of fall in love with the process, that's kind of hard, because you're not going to run into these kids that always, sometimes get it. Sometimes kids will come in and on the first day they're like, they want to know everything, and it's like, what do you want me to do? We only have so much time, and you don't even have the fundamentals down as far as like what we ultimately need. I can't teach you an advanced thing if you don't have the basic stuff down first. And to kind of touch on your point as far as, the PRs go, I've also noticed that too, is sometimes when I'm feeling a little down, sometimes when I'm feeling a little sick or whatever, I don't know what it is, but I think our mind kicks in of, I need to energy preserve to be able to, do what I need to do today. And so sometimes that subconsciously affects us and our mentality going into the gym or to the throwing session or what have you. And it kind of relaxes us to a certain extent because we have no expectation, right? We've now taken away that expectation and gravitated towards something else of, okay, we're in survival mode. We just want to get through this. And I don't know how I'm going to feel. And so now we've taken that result-based kind of training to all of a sudden now we're just kind of focused on the process of ultimately kind of getting through it. And that's what I kind of want guys to start to realize is that, it's great to pump up all these results, but at the same time, it's a process. And it's a never ending process. You are going to be like a dog with its tail just chasing round and round and round and round and round all the time, trying to improve yourself. Right. Now, ultimately, I want the dog chasing itself to go up, level up and whatever. But it's a never ending process, and it never stops. There's never a destination. There's just a journey. And so ultimately what you want to do is you want to fall in love with that journey. And that's something that I've fallen in love with. That's something that I love to do. I love to keep constantly trying to improve and things like that. But just know that it's not a destination. It's the journey for sure.
Yeah, and touching back on like the PRs, and one thing that I'll do is if we're doing a rep scheme that has some lower end reps, is I'll put NFM on the board and circle it, which stands for not a fucking max. And
right.
Like the amount of PRs kids hit on the not a fucking max day is crazy, and it's not a max out. Right. So it's like I never thought of it like what it does to their mindset. I just didn't want their outputs to be that crazy, but I'll let them go as heavy as they feel they can appropriately lift. But I've never thought about it, what you mentioned with like how it kind of just shuts down that anxiety level, and lets them just relax and have a great time and lift and have fun and lift heavy. But that is so important. And that's what practice is.
Right. And I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with this personally, but let's say, for instance, I do have elbow pain, or, I have a twisted ankle or whatever. And let's say if you're of age and, you're able to do this, you go out for a drink that night, right? What happens to that pain? What ultimately happens, right? First of all, muscular pain itself comes from the brain. It comes from the brain telling that muscle that we don't want to do that activity anymore because it's perceived as too stressful or what have you, right? And so now all of a sudden that muscle gets tight because the brain has kind of shut it off, right? So if we go out drinking, all of a sudden those inhibitions are down. Now all of a sudden I'm more relaxed. Now all of a sudden it's crazy. My whatever doesn't hurt anymore. It's because it's kind of inhibited that process neurologically for the brain to let down its guard to ultimately let that muscle do what it wants to do. Muscle pain itself is never from actual muscle pain and the muscle structure. It's always from neurologically your brain shutting that off. That's where pain ultimately comes from. And so if you get a guy that for whatever reason is all hyped up, kind of like what I was talking about, you have to somehow find a way to get his inhibitions down so that he can relax and go out and perform. Because again, most pain is stored at a neurological level and a subconscious level as well, because subconsciously your body has told itself, whenever the fuck we do that activity, it hurts. So stop doing it. And so what it'll do is it'll guard all that and make it super tight and tense. And so some of the process sometimes for these guys that are dealing with some pain, if on a physical level it doesn't work first, like the stressful level, kind of what I was talking about earlier, stressing the tissue and making sure it's good, sometimes we have to go into the subconscious mind and be like, listen, dude, I know that we've had years of pain. I know that we're dealing with a lot of different issues or whatever, but we got to shut that off, and we are perfectly safe. We're perfectly fine. We can do that activity. We're more than capable, but we have to turn that off somehow.
Cam, do you know any Dr. Joe Dispenza's work? You Are the Placebo, Becoming Superhuman, any of those books he's written? Because he does speak a lot about that and how he's basically changed chronic injuries, chronic issues by just approaching it mentally instead of physically. Are you familiar with any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like I was kind of saying earlier, the body's really smart in the sense that, it'll prevent you from doing an activity that ultimately brings it pain. And so again, it's cataloging that information of, listen, we've done this in the past. And if we keep doing this, it's going to keep hurting, right? But we have to kind of change the narrative of the signals that we send to our brain saying that it's okay, right? And so again, we have to check it from a physical level, check it from a neurological level, and then kind of the third thing is mechanically and throwing wise, what does that ultimately look like as far as what areas do we need to address? I think there's a kind of a big breakdown, and I hate to kind of offshoot as far as like the neurological stuff, but there's a big you know people missing the boat as far as what does the throw kind of look like and what does that look like to be pain free mechanically. I think I think there's a lot of theories out there that kind of um, help guys drag the arm through and kind of drag it along as opposed to ultimately using it with the body. And so, yes, we need to address the physical. Yes, we need to address the neurological, but we also need to look at the throw mechanically. Is it sound and does it ultimately kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to take the last couple minutes here to talk about, you had mentioned, your guys are in there training 6 days a week. If you go to your Instagram, you see a lot of different movements, a lot of different pieces of equipment being used, and you kind of already listed all those pieces of equipment that you have, at the house. What does and be as general or specific as you would like for this, but what does basically like an entire week of training look like for you? What's it look like for your guys as far as throwing, exercise selection, sets and reps? Kind of, again, as much detail as you would like, or as general as you would like. What's something like that look like for you, for somebody who's just scrolling through Instagram and thinking, this dude's just coming up with all this stuff, making this stuff up, throwing it against the wall? What's the plan going into weeks for you?
Right. So Monday, Wednesday, and Saturdays are going to be our most advantageous days as far as training goes. Monday is probably going to be a little bit more of a dynamic day where we're moving around a little bit just to set our intention for the week after the Sundays off. Wednesday is going to be our bullpen day, and we're going to compound that with a pretty decent lift, as well as obviously our bullpen. Thursday is kind of like our armchair day, as far as we'll take care of anything that's kind of going on injury wise, and we'll kind of address that. And then Saturday again is our other bullpen day, and ultimately that's going to be another kind of stressful lift. And again, these guys, it can be upper body, lower body, or total body focused in the sense of, what are we working on that day? And as far as programming for that, it's not necessarily that you know beginning the week I have an exact plan as far as Wednesday we're doing this and Saturday we're going to do that. It's more of a sense and feeling for the guys that are ultimately training here. What do they need the most, and where do we need to attack the most? And so that'll just come to me as far as what are we ultimately doing that day. um, and then as far as the throwing goes, like I said, Wednesday, Saturday are our bullpen days. Monday is going to be more of a kind of a form throwing, kind of trying to work on what we need to ultimately work on for Wednesday. And Tuesday, Friday are our lighter days where we'll probably just take some ground balls. We'll probably just do some arm circles or something like that. And that's kind of how the week's kind of drawn out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And James and I've talked about before, that I guess plenty of times, that there's kind of a spectrum that we see in training between super structured, right? This is exactly what we're going to do no matter what, this many sets, this many reps. And it kind of goes over to the other side of the spectrum, is kind of curiosity and exploration and training on the fly and kind of training intuitively. And it seems like the highest performers are somewhere in the middle, but almost a little more towards curiosity and intuitive training. And would that be a good kind of description of what you've got going on?
Absolutely. There are some days where I'll write something down, I'll have it all structured, I'll have it all mapped out, and then we take a 180 and we're like, well, we need to focus on this today. It happens all the time. And sometimes it annoys the shit out of my guys as far as like what the plan ultimately was for that day, especially the ones that are really analytical and kind of
Right.
structured, because there are those, you know, guys out there that like that style as far as, you know, write down this and this is exactly what I'm doing, right? And it's written out that way, you know, like most days we do carry it out that way, but you know, there's sometimes where we just completely fly off the handle, and it's like, well, this is what I'm sensing that you guys ultimately need. Why don't we take this pivot and kind of go with it? And I'm sure it sound. I listened to one of your podcasts, and it sounds like you guys kind of are similar in the sense that you know, some sessions are just completely off the cuff, and you're just like, okay, let's get into this. This is what I'm sensing that you guys need, and let's kind of get it rolling. And sometimes that's how it rolls here. But you know, ultimately there is a structure. I'd say probably, you know, 95% of the time we kind of stick to that, but sometimes we go off the cuff.
Yeah, and I
Every
think
once in a while, you just got to send it.
it's different. Like when we're talking about like strength and general strength development, there needs to be some type of back end structure to the reasoning behind the movements that we're selecting. But then when it comes to skill acquisition, that lends itself way more to the exploration and the intuitive side of things, because we have the end goal in mind, but we don't really know how we're going to get there until we start moving around and exploring to figure out how we're going to get there. So you know, understanding that yin and it kind of goes back to the yin and yang, you know, concepts again. But um, man, hey, I've always been fascinated by the pitching delivery mechanics. It's one of the most beautiful things I think there is in sport. Then the next like closest thing to me is like the snatch, the weightlifting snatch. Like those movements are really to me like my favorite things to just to watch. And I just think there's so many things similarly happening with those two movements in terms of like perceived force that we have to be producing an insane amount of force in both movements, and then we have to be so precise with both movements. And the funny thing is I love both of them, but like when I do them together I get trash shoulders and it just messes me up,
Yep.
so I
Yep.
never do both of them in the same training cycles. But I just wanted to kind of, how do you become an artist when it comes to your pitching mechanics in like, because they're so individual. And if you look at snatches, it's the same way. The high level snatchers, nobody does it the same way. The high level pitchers, nobody does it the same way. Um, you know, how have you created that kind of like artistic touch to the throwing mechanics that you're helping guys with?
Right. No, there's general windows though, as far as like what positions guys ultimately get into. You know, there's been some guys that I've worked with that are hitting guys, not worked with, but worked beside, and they've always told me that to get into, you know, the where they're hitting the ball, everybody gets in the general windows. The journey to that position may ultimately be different, but everybody gets into general windows. They flip up the ball unless you're Munoz from Seattle, where your arm like literally doesn't stop moving. Most guys get up to a window point in which the ball stands still for about a frame, right? You see Jacob DeGrom do it. You see Garrett Cole. You see Chapman does it as well. Like they'll get up to this point. Soto from the Tigers too. He throws 100. They'll get up here and then they just pull right down through the ball. It's incredible. It looks like they're pulling down on a rope, right? Um, so again, like everybody gets into general windows of time, and so it's being able to take an athlete and getting him so in tune with what he's ultimately doing that all of a sudden he can almost start to sense when he's maximizing and getting into those positions. And so that's where the artistry kind of comes in. And it's like, well, what does he need to be able to address those issues, right? Whether it be kind of a drill, which I don't really like because, again, you're not really drilling when you're trying to play a season. But you know, how can you get to that point the fastest? And it should just be about, you know, talking about where positionally do you need to get into and how does that ultimately flow together for you.
Cam, after this conversation, it would be hard to imagine people wouldn't want to see more. People wouldn't be intrigued. For our listeners who want to hear more from Train Like a Savage, where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, you can look me up at Train Like a Savage _. You can kind of follow along with my journey there. And also the guys that I kind of work with, and you can check out my reels, I guess.
Yeah, and they're sick. A lot of good stuff. Good is not the best word used. A lot of great stuff. A lot of stuff that I watch and makes me want to try as a guy who's been training for over 20 years, very consistently, 4 to 5 days a week. It's so cool to see the things that you're doing and the positions you're getting into and what you're exploring. And it's excellent. So I suggest all our listeners, if they haven't paused this yet and gone to your social media, that they do that and check that out. Because I think a lot of this conversation will make a ton more sense. We always do wrap up with what are we missing, and we'd answer that a couple times. Talked about stressing the tissue. We also talked about addressing injury history with the throw.
Yep.
Is there anything that we missed before we wrapped up that you would be upset if we didn't cover?
Yeah, I'll quickly talk about that. I think in the industry, and again, I'm not an anti-long toss guy, but I think that a lot of guys are hopping on the long toss training stimulus overload underload kind of thing, where they're trying to get a training effect through the throw. And ultimately, I don't think that that's the best way and the most efficient way to go about it. I think we need to understand that our front shoulder needs to get down as my front foot hits so that I can ultimately flip up the ball on time and use gravity to my advantage to be able to pull that ball down through. I think what we're ultimately missing in that is that long toss kind of creates this upward tilt of the shoulders, which gets us outside of our back hip and starts to get us to drift forward too much, and we get in bad habits. I think ultimately, if we were to focus more so on mastering our throw at 90, 120 feet, and understanding that we do have to get back down on top of this. You look at any hard thrower that throws 100. You look at Jacob deGrom. You look at Garrett Cole. Diaz does it really well with the Mets. He'll get back on top. This front shoulder will be down as that front foot hits, and then he just pulls right down through on that baseball, keeping his chin over his back hip. I think ultimately long toss and some of the drills that we're doing is kind of missing the boat in that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And James, you would know better than I do, but we see a lot of that, and I don't even see half as many baseball guys as he sees. So we appreciate you sharing the knowledge. Continue to do everything you're doing, man. You're inspiring a lot of people. You're motivating a lot of people. You're getting a lot of people better. And, that's all we can ask in this industry, right, is to give our heart and give our soul, like you had mentioned, into, with the athletes we work with. So thanks so much, man, for coming on episode 53 of Cutoffs and Coffee. If you're with us this long, if you've been with us for the last hour, please remember the 3 things we ask you to do at the end of every episode. It is to continue to practice gratitude. It's to tell the people that you love them. And it's also to live your life stimulated, whether it be energy drinks or coffee or tea or both sometimes. Please continue to do that. Yeah. Thank you all for listening. This has been episode 53. We will catch you all in the next one.